Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast, where we have conversations with guests about their life, loss, grief, and of course, grief dreams, which can be dreams of the deceased. If you want to know more about the topic and your hosts, please visit our website at griefdreams.ca.
To support our podcast, please go ahead and rate it. For additional ways to support us, please refer to our show notes. Before we move on with the show, we'd like to give a territory acknowledgement. Long before Canada was formed, the Stalo people were the original land stewards, and they have lived here since time immemorial. They continue to live in the unceded Stalo territory, known to settlers as the Fraser Valley and Lower Fraser Canyon of British Columbia. We recognize and honor the contribution that Indigenous people have made and continue to make to our community and the topic of grief dreams.
Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. Thank you again for joining us today. So on the show, we have your two hosts, myself, Joshua, and we have Jade. And our special guest is Addison Brasil, who is a speaker and the author of the book First Year of Grief Club, a gift from a friend who gets it. He shows up in the world as an active and committed mental health advocate after finding himself just to the left of death 3 times during his 20s. Losing his brother to an inoperable brain tumor, finding his father after suicide, and surviving a fatal accident that killed a dear friend and left him relearning to walk. Attributing his ability to not only survive, but thrive with PTSD and compounded grief to the value of community and connection. Thank you, Addison, so much for joining us today. And man, reading that bio, it really got to me with so many significant deaths all in your 20s. And I don't know what to really say about that, but I'm glad you survived and I'm glad you're here to talk about your journey.
Thank you. Yeah. And let me just say it is an honor to be here. And I feel very present, and I feel very similarly to how you probably feel after hearing that right now. It's just, a retrospective time for me. So to hear that, there's this also little part of me that wants to be, and he's really fun too. And he likes to laugh all the time. And he's had all these amazing adventures too. Just like add that in there. But yes, thank you for having me. And thank you for doing the hard part for me. When you say that part, I could just smooth sail now.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. No promises.
And so just looking sort of at that journey in your 20s, my dad died when I was in my 20s also. And I had no awareness and no guide, I guess, to understanding my feelings and having, I guess, a support network around me that really understood it either. I'm just curious if you could maybe just go back and talk about that journey that you went through and what you learned. Because I think, for being an advocate of grief literacy and also mental health, I'm guessing you've had your challenges through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my biggest goal looking back with the book was definitely to dispel the belief, because I spent probably 10 to 13 years believing this was something I could fix. To dispel the belief that something was going to fix this, whether that was a literal tool or type of therapy or, whatever, or fame or validation or love or something would be big enough to make it so that I didn't have to feel these losses. My brother died of an inoperable brain tumor, which was much like anybody who's been on a journey with a child with cancer. So that was a 4-year journey while I was just in high school as well, sort of finding myself. And we're just 2 years apart, so very close. And there was a lot that came with that being, the older brother. It just didn't sit well, as you might imagine. But there was so much to that process, and whether I liked it or not, so much information available to us that possible ending was going to come. And in a way, I always describe my brother's death in my own way as a beautiful death. He was just the most beautiful kid, and he was so surrounded by love. And the day he died, even, we were all surrounding him, and it was a holiday Monday, so nobody had to get a call at work. It was just, I jokingly kind of always say, you just had to do it right, all the way, to the end. And he used humor, like most of our family, throughout most of that process to really make us all feel like he was never really sick until the end. So it's interesting because I had that whole grief process, obviously, and then being 23, I returned to Toronto, and I got very, very close with my dad after his second marriage ended. and kind of became like sort of his main touch point within the family, at least. And there was a bit of an idea that something was off, but it was within 2 weeks of his death that I was sort of sounding alarms and going, okay, this isn't my dad. Something's happening here. And this is why I publicly thanked when I wrote that article for Los Angeles Magazine, Zach Williams, Robin Williams' son, because he so publicly had to grieve his dad with everybody who saw him as sort of this life of the party, always fun. And my dad was like that. When I had to call people the day my dad died, people were trying to convince me on the phone that I was mistaken. And as someone who's found someone after suicide, I assured them I was not mistaken. But that's just how palpable this belief was. Like, no, he's always happy. He's always the life of the party. He's always making a joke. He's always kind of making sure everybody else is having fun. That suicide in itself, especially in where I wasn't in tune. And of course, I've been a part of like a whole men's mental health movement now. And now we talk about a lot more, and there's apps and I'm proud to be a part of all of that sort of history as well. But in 2012, there really wasn't. And a Portuguese Catholic man who's twice divorced and has seen the real backlash of the economy in the 2008, not to mention losing his son to cancer, there wasn't outlets really, like there wasn't. And I know that he was sort of looking for help at that time, but it wasn't the world we lived in today. And I say that because as a griever, who inherited my mental health education at that time for me in my 20s, when, I was trying to figure out who I was and dealing with all of that stuff, I also was in no way equipped to deal with the resulting mental health challenges and the PTSD that came from, and I'm sure we can put a trigger warning on this episode, but like from the reality of no matter how bad that feeling in your stomach may be, and you follow it somewhere, that there's actually a chance that you're going to find like sort of the worst thing that you could imagine. And that's your dad. And so that way that I felt about my brother, in an inverse way, it was like, this is the person who was always going to protect me. And somehow my job in loving him through his finality and his final hours became the least protected I ever felt as a child, obviously, from one thing I just never wanted to see or be a part of. So yeah, it sent me on a journey in my 20s. And I think that looking back, as I brought up in the beginning, one where I really was trying to figure out how to fix it and how to make sense of it. And after my brother, I started like a huge nonprofit organization and raised all this money for brain tumor families in his name and all this press, and, went back to school and graduated with honors and danced on scholarship and went and got like my first job right after school, like all the things, so there are these waves of sort of this masterful young man of vices where I was just sort of balancing everything in a way that, while I was experimenting with, well, what could fix this? Like, how successful do I need to be? Or how many people can I save to make this a good thing, kind of thing? And then also just like, what type of therapy, like, coaches, retreats, like, can we yoga this? Like all the things, tapping, like, like Reiki me 100 times over, like just, all the things I really got set off onto this journey, which was very different from anybody I knew at that time of what they were sort of, weirdly going through a journey of finding themselves in the 20s, but not so much in everything was not so much in response to trauma and surviving that trauma. And when you have PTSD in that way, you also don't get to the grieving of like son grieving father for a long time. I was like very much dealing with the traumatic element, much like a first responder, for a long time. And then my brain would slowly try to go, okay, so that bad thing, that's dad. And it was like running Windows on Mac, like we cannot, like the operating system was just not fit for that. But yeah, so that really became for me from like about 23 to 28, just sort of believing I could fix it, believing I had fixed it, realizing that wasn't true, jumping into the intensity of some other healing practice or some other modality. And around 28, I believe I remember being in LA, and everybody at the time was kind of just saying, hey, like, you really sound like you. Like, I think you did the damn thing. Like, it's like you did it. And I believed it. I was like, I fixed it. I beat it. I'm back, and I literally went out. I was celebrating that week and we went out, and on the way home, we were in that terrible accident that unfortunately killed my dear friend and left me hospitalized and relearning to walk. But really, that was the game changer. It was like, you haven't fixed anything. And when I was in that bed and I couldn't move and I couldn't run and I couldn't achieve and I couldn't even help myself, never mind anybody else. I couldn't do any of the things. I couldn't drink. I couldn't do any of the normal, like young man things you might do to distract you. I couldn't do anything. And I'd always used, as like a former dancer and athlete, I'd always used running and being physically able as a huge way to get through anything. And I was, in a bed, relearning to walk, into wheelchair, into walker. And anytime I would sort of bring up running, they would kind of be like, you're lucky to be here mentality. And it was like this, no, I have to run. I have to run thing, that sort of. And so that's sort of, those three grief processes. And that one, unfortunately, because of the element of physical pain and everything I'd been through, that third grief process really brought me to my own suicidal moment where I sort of, my whole team was aware. I basically was like, Mom, you're babysitting me. I'd co-parented since the day I was born. And it was the first time I just relinquished everything. I just like really didn't think I could be here anymore. And the whispers of maybe that's too much for one person sort of really became real for me at that time. But luckily, I have an incredible mother and an incredible group of supporters and friends. And I have always had the absolute honor and privilege of being able to tell the truth in those moments. And it truly, that's why I always say that in my bio, that like this idea of community and connection, really was that. And it was in that whole process, I really did think I wasn't going to make it. And I remember just saying like out loud, if you get me through, I'll go back for the others. Like, I promise I'll go back for the others. Like, just please, like almost as if, which is so odd when you think about suicide, like that I was asking for it to not happen. But really, everyone, when you think about it, at least when I thought about it normally younger, this was something that, my dad thought about and carried out. Like, you wouldn't think there's the disconnect of like a cancer sort of coming for you. But obviously I learned, and the one thing out of that experience was, it was the most understanding, compassion, and closest that I felt to my dad, because I just got it. There was no me. There was no, like, all the things you'd think. It just, I just needed the pain to stop, and I just needed things to be quieter. It wasn't all these weighing out all these things of how it would affect anyone. It was like if a fire alarm was going off in your house all the time, eventually you'd do anything to stop it kind of feeling. Luckily I came through, and from that day forward, it really became this thing where, grief and mental health are not something you fix. They're something you honor. So that's sort of the process of really, honestly, that takes me to about 30 years old. So that was my 20s, my brother at 19, and sort of coming out of all of that at 30 and finally feeling like in the pandemic, like everybody was grieving and I wasn't isolated anymore. I could tell everybody was dealing with the loss of something meaningful. And it just finally made sense for me to be like, hey, I think I can offer something on this. And that's sort of where the book was born.
Incredible. I'm like speechless after that. That's so insightful. And I'm just curious if you can elaborate a little bit on the notion of feeling like there was something to fix. And you talked about the accident. So was the accident with your dear friend in the car, did that push you to the place of realization that there was like nothing to fix? Because I feel like I talk to lots of people that are still in that belief a lot, and they're spinning around and like you were saying, how can I yoga out of this, or how can I fix it? And I think radical acceptance around, to a degree, around what's happened, but I'm just curious a little bit more around how you landed in that space of like, there's actually nothing to fix. This is going to be a continued journey. This is part of who I am and how I'm going to move around in the world moving forward.
Yeah, I think in part it was trying absolutely everything And like as sort of a young actor, writer, model in LA in my 20s, I am so happy now that I never picked up and got famous because like any sort of in looking in on that process. But I think it really was an exhaustion. And then I think of, for me, it was waking up in the hospital bed that next day and sort of being surrounded by everybody. And my mom had flown in, and my memory is a little bit jogged around the whole thing, but it was when I literally couldn't move anymore. It just became so obvious. Like there is nothing to fix, and there's no way you can fix this. There's nothing that is going to just fill, there's no partner, there's no job, there's no Oscar, there's no book award or bestseller list or saving the entire world for their mental health that's going to fix this hole. It's not like that. It's not fillable. It's just a part of the texture now. It'd be like trying to fix the holes in the moon. They don't need to be filled. That's the texture of the moon. You know what I mean? It just became so obvious. And I just remember like touching and feeling, because my head split open and they had sewn it back together. And I remember I was just like they kept touching it and looking at the blood because I just couldn't believe that it was possible. And I, just looking at my mom and saying like, what is happening? Because even within my own family, it really started. We were all around that bed with my brother, and really my parents lost a child, which I always, I don't believe in competitive grief or comparing, but, bearing a child, like, there was something around that, but we were a family around that. And then with my dad, because I was the one who was there, it was like we were all in it, but I was in it in a different way. And then with the accident, it was really everybody trying to support me with this very good friend I had and my challenges, but it wasn't like everybody was in it together at all anymore. So it just became this totally different thing. And so I think it was just like being tired and also literally not being able to do any of the things that you would naturally maybe want to do as a distraction, even because, like I didn't believe any of like sort of the myriad of vices that you have in your 20s, whether it's overachieving, traveling, partying, whatever. I didn't see those as fixes, but they were a part of this fake idea I had before the accident that I was fixed because I was now balancing them so well. So it was more like as soon as I realized I wasn't going to be able to sort of, I don't know, almost distract myself in a beautifully well done way that I give myself credit for in a different way, because it was well intentioned. It sounds cliche, but I did want to thrive. I didn't want to just survive. I felt like I owed it to them too. In a weird way, people will say to me, you're like the unluckiest person I know. And I'm like, did you hear the stories? Like I'm just to the left every time. I still went back to school and danced on scholarship. I still traveled the world. I still got to move to California and go through the groundlings and like, all these things that I got to do and still get to do, it's a very weird thing to think like, although it's like heartbreaking that in a way I'm not the unlucky one. And the funny side, because this is the funny side is what I always say is I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you. It's the person next to me. It's not me, and then that's sort of the easiest way to get a laugh and change the subject, which I've become masterful at, of course.
I always find it interesting when people do talk about sort of that fix. They do, like I see it all the time also. It's just part of, I think, that the culture narrative, and that a lot of times we don't even know what we're doing or think we're doing it. It feels good in a way because it's alleviating some pain or some conscious sort of time with the grief. And so that's just the path we go, like unconsciously, because it feels a little bit better. And those are the tools we used prior for other pains and other moments of that we suffered. And then you have this. And I think that what I really sort of take from all of it is that the accident and you being sort of not being able to move and not being able to use those vices or those activities, you had to be honest with yourself. It forced you to be honest. Like there's no running from it. And it just like put you in this corner for you to really see who are you, without all this other stuff. And that's such a scary position to be in. As you said, it took you to the edge of life, in the sense of if you even found life meaningful anymore, when you couldn't do those things and you had to face all that was in your life and all that was inside. And, I've had moments in my life where I was at the edge, and it did take this sense of honesty and surrender to the honesty. I don't know if you it's just like this horrifying look at who I actually am versus who I thought I was. And I needed this, like a sort of this event to really sort of shake me to the core. And it was never a pleasant feeling, but it did put me on a different path than I was prior. And I don't know if you could speak on that, because I think that's an important part, because you did speak about the importance of honesty. And there's something about surrendering to honesty, and also about how difficult it is. Like, people say they want honesty, but I don't know if they really do, because it's painful to hear a lot of times.
Yeah, I think that brings up such a good point. And weirdly, like right now, I'm like writing this one keynote, and it's sort of right around what I've been like exploring recently. But I love that you brought that up, because it sounds in retrospect sometimes when I speak or when you read the book, like I was aware the whole time. And I, of course, was not. It wasn't like, that this path of fixing. And I think a lot of people don't realize until, and it's not always a negative thing. Actually, I was listening to Anderson Cooper's new podcast on grief, and Molly Shannon was saying that it wasn't until she got SNL, she got her dream, that she realized that's what she had been trying to do the whole time, to fix it and fix losing her mother at such a young age. And that was the first time she cried about her mother's death, like 25 years later, was when she got the thing she subconsciously believed deeply would be enough, would fill something or fix something, so we don't know. And it's like, so some people, it's like, you get that promotion, and then it's like, then you're realizing, or, whatever it is. I learned in a very harsh way with sort of another compounded grief process. But I think that just allowing that, if this is like new information for someone, like that's a whole process on its own. It's just this idea of like, and really gently, compassionately, kindly, curiously looking at that and being like, oh, I guess I was sort of on some level like an innocent child would, hoping that vacation or that, this thing that I put all my stock into getting to would maybe fix it. And I think some people, and I think I did, I've always had such a strong desire to be a father, and that amplified a lot after I lost my brother specifically. But like this idea that but then it was like, making a new family or adding to the family, or having to then, now my whole focus for the rest of my life is about somebody else. Like it's like guaranteed, verified, blue check. I'll pay my $8 a month, Elon, for my, like for something that matters more than me, So there's all these really innocent roots, and it's just like getting honest with yourself and doing it in a compassionate and curious way is like any other muscle. Like it is like you are in the gym, like I say, like in the grief arena every day, and gently like going like, okay, yep. Like just talking to yourself almost like a child in the way that you might do that. But I think that, I had a lot of that around the time when the pain became too much, where, I was so, we had to fix it. We had to, whatever it was, surgery, whatever it was, but like I could not go on like this. And I had one friend at the time who just said, what if you just accepted it? What if this is it? Like, what if? And I really did think that doing that might be the end of my life. Like I really thought he was tiptoeing into, but in a way, the day that I would have thought I would no longer be here, that's what it was. That sort of ultimate, this is what there is, and I can no longer do anything to fix it. And I thought within moments, I wouldn't be able to be here, of sitting in that. And it was quite the opposite experience for me. It was like in that, like you said, in that surrender and in that acceptance. And those words get used in a weird way sometimes, but when it's a literal surrendering of every limited belief, of every sort of hope, every begging, bargaining, all the grief stuff, like when you're just really like, no, like it's just not going to work. Where are we at? And you end up sitting there with your real self. And that's like very uncomfortable and very just like telling of just what really matters and what matters from this moment forward. And It's funny. You're striking a chord because I'm going to have to call my mom later because I know we both know that morning. I remember the talking to something above or whatever, but then it's a blur. And then like in this weird way, I'm carried by magic and obviously love and support of family at the time. But then the next thing I can really remember is holding my dog, which I got like, this would be like a month later, where it's like, and I'm sitting there going like, oh my God, I'm here kind of thing. For a little bit of inspiration also, out of that surrender and out of then going into trusting what I truly thought would be healing for me and my body and no longer listening to anybody else, I live 98% in no pain to this day. And I run at Barry's boot camp. I sprint. I do all the things that they said I could never do. So it isn't like this, it's sort of like, I always say like there's three Brazil boys, my brother, my father, who are both like sons to me at times, actually. But like my brother, my father, and me. And it's like, well, what happened to the third one? And it's like, I say he died too. He got to rebirth. Like, it's just that person who lost those people had to be completely let go of after the accident. There was no way that little boy who believed that like, maybe a God was punishing him for something, or like, all the things you sort of form growing up, none of that could stay. It was him or me in a weird way. And then I got to be me for the first time in my whole life. Yeah, it was just, but it's an honesty I wish more of us could get to without trauma or loss. I wish also that I could do really creative things and do all these big impact things that I do, or like, write or do the things that people celebrate me for without feeling like my sort of soul needs to be like a cloth wrung out for it to then happen. Like, I wish that we could get to these moments without something unbearable forcing it. But it's that weird thing where it's like, there's no way I can get through this. And then suddenly you're in a room with yourself for the first time. And it just becomes very clear and very different of what honoring would look like. And really, from that day forward, it was about starting by checking in, starting to go back and experiment and go, okay, what really works for me? I don't have a list of 10 things that I give to other people. I give them 52 experiments in the book that they can do to build their own resilience tools. And if my tool doesn't work for you, I will help you throw it out. Like, I have no interest in being able to say like, there's 12 hacks to grief. Like, there isn't, I'm just in the club with you. And I know it's a lifetime membership, and I know in accepting that I had a lot of freedom, but everyone's going to be on their own journey of getting to that point.
I guess in talking about the book, it's based around that first year of loss that people go through. And I'm just sort of looking at where you are now. And as you said, grief is a lifelong process. Where are you within your own grief, and how do you see those emotions come up in your daily life now?
You're catching me at a very like pivotal and odd moment. I feel like this last year, like as I approach my birthday on Monday, I'm realizing that this last year, 33, was really the first year of my entire life that I got to be here, of my entire adult life, since my brother passed. But so for me, the whole time I've been an adult, basically, where everything that I'm doing, feeling, being isn't in response to sort of this tidal wave of something behind me, of this unbearable idea of, will I make it through this grief? Or the post-traumatic mentally with my father, and then mentally and physically later, everything was basically in response to that, and keeping myself always healthy enough that I didn't cause anybody else to have grief, basically, and that I was here. So this has been the first year, and really in the last month, the first month of my whole life as an adult, that I'm here. And it's very interesting. And it's funny because everything, like, I'm like, why'd you write that book? Why do you say this stuff? Because doing it when you're fully feeling, when there's no parts of you really protecting or numbing or in some sort of post-traumatic state or space, it's a lot. I feel like someone just turned the lights on and the sound on and like everything at once, and keep having these moments where I feel like a newborn and like an old man, like sort of, I have like Benjamin Button syndrome, like where I'm like both at the same time, because I feel like I've never been here, and I'm like, whoa, this is so cool. But also like, I don't know if you remember like your first like crush in high school, or being like when you're like 14 and everything like actually hurts, like feeling these things is like, and I'm having that at 34, and everybody's like, what are you talking about? Like, like it's a really interesting little moment that I'm in. And I will say I love the quality of challenges that I'm finally in, but it's a real responsibility to continue to quote unquote honor the journey, as I say, when you're really a part of it and it's really happening. And so it's moved away a lot from some of the more traumatic elements when I may fall into some rumination or remembering, and more into these really like heartbreaking sort of like thinking about the last time my dad hugged me, came to me. I went for coffee yesterday in the city, and I guess I walked in at 10:57 a.m., not realizing what day it was or what time it was. And I took my coffee order, and then they said, just stand to the side. And then they said, okay, it's 11 a.m. on Remembrance Day, 11/11. We're going to do 2 minutes of silence. And in that 2 minutes with like a whole group of people in dead silence, especially coming out of a pandemic like this, I have not had to do that, like hold space like that with strangers. Like I just felt so vulnerable, and that 2 years felt like 20 years. Like with the flashes I got, it wasn't some like what it would, the post-traumatic things, which would kind of usually make me shudder. It was these really like, my brother putting his hand on my hand, and my dad hugging me for the last time, and my friend's hair as she laughed, like these really like visceral moments of like, so beautiful and so wonderful to not be completely driven by the more traumatic elements, but holy crap, I'm only a human. And it's like, so it's like just the tears streaming immediately, like having access to all of this. And I said to my mom yesterday, like, I struggle every year before my birthday. It's like this weird twist of I get to keep going. And she said, I'm so sorry, honey. Like, is there anything I can do? And I was like, I just want you to know that what makes it so unbearable is that it's 90% gratitude. Like, I'm actually just cannot believe that within all of that, I got out of it, and I get to be here, and I get to laugh, and I still hope and awe, and I stayed connected. Everything in grief teaches you to disconnect. Everything teaches you. And Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote The Grieving Brain, will tell you grief doesn't start the day someone dies. It starts the day you meet them, when you form the bond. So when you come to know that experientially and so honestly, the idea of creating another bond with anything, a job, a dream, a person, it's insane. It's insane. And so I'm like living this wild thing where I'm like, my heart is outside of my chest, and I'm just really trusting myself and everybody. And I hope this goes okay. And does anybody have any bubble wrap? Because I'm not sure like how this is going to go, but it's the only way. And it's you're catching me at such an odd moment, because I just really am in this really radically honest spot that I'm not sure I'm very comfortable with. And I think it's what I thought that I've wanted for 13 years. And now that it's here, I'm like, oh no, let's go back. Like, let's close it up. Let's end this kind of like just being open to the world thing. So yeah. That's today in grief, quite literally today. I mean, that experience happened yesterday. So I think it's very human. People say like, you shouldn't feel bad on your birthday or whatever. Like, you shouldn't feel guilty. People always say that around grief and stuff. And I always just feel like, well, I think it's the perfectly human amount, and it's not that I feel guilty that I'm alive in these days leading up. It's a mixture of, really missing these people who have meant so much to me, grieving the loss of that I'm not even the person that knew them anymore, because I've come through this journey. And then also, they were talking about at Modern Elder Academy when I went down in Baja in June, that people might live till like 103. Well, I'm only 33. Like, I'm like, that's a long time to miss three of the most incredibly beautiful, amazing people.
I think it's important. A couple things when you're talking. I so appreciate your insight around everything and just highlighting when you describe turning the lights on, and it's like, oh, you created these tools and you've been working through this grief, and then you turn the lights on and now you're in a different phase of the grief, equally important, but different in like nuance. And the way you describe those beautiful, simple moments and shifting into that, because I think a lot of people spend a lot of time in that traumatic space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just the dichotomy of grieving maybe the way somebody died or some of the more seemingly dark elements of death, and then shifting over to those small moments that you're describing, that I can tell you're a writer because the way you're describing the hair and, these little things that are beautiful moments and pull these different emotions and how you're relating to those. A very important part of grief, but also a very different, really hard to articulate those kind of feelings, because you're reflecting on such beautiful moments or qualities about those people that bring a warm feeling, but you have the longing and stuff. So that's really interesting to me. And also, I just wanted to point out when you're describing earlier how you're coping and the maintenance of balance in your coping. And I think it's important to highlight that when we're distracting from ourselves and, filling the void like we talked about, I mean, it's easy to categorize the unhealthy coping strategies as something that's pulling us out of ourselves. But I think when you talk about balance and fitness and traveling and all those things that can be categorized as healthy, and on the surface, they absolutely are healthy. Having balance is a beautiful thing, and we like to do those, but those elements can also be mistaken for things that are helping us, but in a way they might not be. And so I think it's important for people to have discernment, because a lot of times I say like, oh, if they're consuming alcohol, that they're running from themselves. That's easy to kind of put into a little box there. And so I really appreciate and like your mindfulness around just being able to call things out for what they are. And even those things look healthy on the surface, that they might be used in an unhealthy way or a way that's not helping us acknowledge our full
I love that. Yeah. And I think that discernment word that you used is so important. And if there's one thing I could go back and tap on my own shoulder so many times is because I might hear a conversation like this and think like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that marathon anyway, because obviously I'm just doing it to distract myself and fix something, or like run that charity or whatever. And it's not that at all, because I would go through phases like that of like, why am I writing this? Is this to like, but if you can tap in while it's happening and go, hey, this is really helping part of me get through where I'm at. And it's just removing the belief that there's going to be a result when it's completed that's bigger than it is. You will get to say you've run a marathon, and that will be so real in every part of that. But that marathon is not going to bring anyone back. And it's not going to push you into a place where you no longer have to honor your grief on a daily basis. And I think if it's sort of like the detect early kind of thinking, but if you can gently be saying that to yourself the whole time, yeah, you're doing it, you're running, whatever the thing is. And I think even with things that, may seem destructive, with vices, if you're leaning into something that somebody might classify as unhealthy, we're using a tool at all times. And I try to have no judgment about anything. Like, my friends, I'm like, whatever it is, just tell me, like, trust me, like, thought it, done it, whatever. Like, I was really trying to figure this thing out. But even if it is something that you feel is unhealthy, still having that relationship of going, okay, yeah. Okay. And it's weird because what you're doing is you start to slowly untangle a little bit to the point where it doesn't work anymore. It kind of becomes the cheap stuff. Once you sort of become too smart to be dumb. And I hate it. I hate it because I want to do the cheap stuff again. Like, I just want to like go for the dopamine and get out.
It's not happening.
Right. And it's like, you get healthier, but even if you can be gentle and curious and compassionate and discern in that way, no matter what it is that you're doing, but it's just kind of being like, hey, I'm really proud of you. Also, just checking in that this award or the app reaching this many people or the book being a bestseller, it's not going to fix the grief. It's not going to fill, like, that's
Absolutely.
their special place, like I said, that's their crater in the moon of your heart. Like that is not fillable. But like, love that it's bringing purpose or the right amount of distraction at the right amount of time, and many grief researchers like Mary Frances will say avoidance is one of the biggest tools of resilience, as long as we need it to be. I sat on my hands and counted for like 3 months because I was having post-traumatic reactions consistently. Like, I was avoiding everything, but that was the most necessary tool in my toolkit at that time. If it gets to a point, obviously, where you're avoiding all the time, then maybe that's something that you speak to somebody about. But taking away that judgment, I just love that you're saying that, because part of my whole thing of being an everyday person talking about real life grief is like, I haven't figured it all out. Like, it's not like, oh, well, it must be nice for him. Like, I am hyperactively thinking, which is what I thought we were going to talk about this whole time, dreaming incessantly, which I can't control, that extra layer of thinking well, sort of sleeping. But, and that's just part of the game of it. It's just kind of like there's no winning. And maybe because I danced for so long, no one ever is done dance. You can't like do ballet. Like, it's never over. Like, nobody gets to be the best. There's no finish line. That's it. Like, you've done it. Like, you literally do the best of what you can with it and enjoy every ounce of it until the day where you no longer do it. It's much like that with this, where it's like, get rid of perfect because it doesn't exist here. And if you're not enjoying the excellence of this, then like, let's relook at what we're doing, and what tools we're using. But I think that it's so easy for us to get sort of mean and hard on ourselves. I do it, especially when I ruminate. And I always have like Corey Muscar's voice in my head being like, get curious, be like, what else you got? Okay, buddy, what's going, and I'm like trying to do that. But like, my go-to was, I can bully this out of myself, and I can punish myself for bad habits. And that, that little co-parent in me was always like, I can sort of beat this out of you emotionally, kind of thing. And I think just still enjoy everything. It's not like, oh, I'm just doing this to not feel my grief. Like, not at all. I think there's such a fullness there. And in fact, the acknowledgement of it and the awareness, like you were saying, can actually give access to more of the fullness.
Absolutely.
Even like it's gonna pull out. Yeah.
Yeah. And pull the delusion out of it. Like, I mean, and me and Josh talk about this a lot. It's like, don't expect us to do X, Y, Z. Like, go ahead and do it, have at her and enjoy it and allow it to give you something, whatever it is. And you'll know if it's fed you in the right way or if it hasn't. But, you have to just be candid with yourself, like you're saying, about those expectations and what the ROI is going to be. And sometimes the ROI isn't what you think, what you came for. It ends up being something different. And those are all things. But I think, having those supports, having those people in your life, people who are smart enough, like you said, that have the intellect or the emotional intelligence to say, and these are my favorite kind of people, but, to say, like, what's your end game for this? Are you doing this just because you're doing this? Are you doing this repeatedly because you're running for something? Let's go down the rabbit hole with that and explore that and what your expectations are. And of course, you need somebody with the capacity to run that through with you. And those are great conversations, but I think help us really navigate like what's important to pour into. And I think this is just a really important conversation about grief, because so many people are learning themselves through the grief process. And there's so many parts of it that's like, how we relate to the people that we lost, but it's really a journey into the self. And so navigating all that and just figuring out who we are and what feels good and what's going to be the best for us long term. And, like you talked a lot about supporting other people around us, find that light in a really, really dark time. And your story about it's mind blowing. Like the fact that you're here and you're at a young age. And like you said, you've lived 1,000 lifetimes in that short period, and you're smiling and you're here and you look vital. And of course the viewers can't see that piece, but they can tell by your voice, and it's amazing. Like, I'm just listening to you talk and like, I don't know you on a personal level, but it's like, he's still here. Like, he's still pushing through. Yeah, it's very beautiful. And I know that the listeners who have gone through some incredibly challenging and dark times and are in it right now are
Yes.
coming to that space. Like they can't see a way out. So
I think
appreciate
you
that.
really hit on that there. And I love this as sort of like a thought to always remind people of. But I think it's easier. It's the most innocent thing in the world to focus on learning to live without someone or something meaningful. And I think a lot more of the process is learning who you are within the loss of that meaning. And it's uncomfortable because, like I said, you end up in a room with yourself. And that's the one room we all never want to be in, right? But if you can gently remind yourself of that, it also is a very big switch from a results-oriented fixing mindset, because the first one, it's something you're trying to complete. It's something you think you can do. I'm going to learn to live without them. It's a task. And the second one is a process. You're an ever-changing, living, breathing thing. I used to say like the American Constitution, but I'm really not sure anymore about that. But like this whole different way of just the way you're looking at it. And sometimes I get nervous that I don't have like these 6 steps that I drop whenever I like go on stage or whatever. But it's like, dude, you spent 13 years and you still have to remind yourself every single day to dispel the belief that this can be fixed. It's so simple, but it's not. And it's just like an everyday thing. Sometimes for me in the last week, it's been an every 10 seconds thing. Hey. And just, it's literally like my final, I feel like, stage in life of getting ready to, if I choose to end up being a father, has been whether or not I can treat myself the way I would like to treat my own son. And that's only just showing up now, like this gentle, hey, okay, yeah, okay, like let's deal with this, let's sit down here, let's it's okay. Like that has not existed, and that's still just like an everyday thing. So I think that's such a wonderful way to think about it. And I'm sure a lot of people do obviously tune in, given that the Grief Dreams podcast. I know that I personally ruminate a lot around even that, of things I can't control, and getting mad at myself that I'm thinking or having these experiences like while I'm sleeping. And it's just, I think there's just information in all of it, but like we don't need to use all of it. And we, again, don't need to like achieve like our knowing of our grief at every minute. Like, it's just like, this is gray space, dude. This is gray space. Write down in the book, I leave gray space throughout the whole thing and I made sure that it was gray when they designed it, because this idea that it is like ever changing, anything you write in gray space or any life you live in gray space, it's not set. It's not set. You become someone new every single day. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling when you're trying to stay exactly like you were in this weird, innocent way of trying to stay close to someone you've lost, because you want to stay as much of the person you were on the day they left, so that they're still proud of that person and the person they loved exists if both of you can't. And it's a lot more gray than that. And you rob yourself of getting to know who you can actually do this thing called life with. Like yourself, like who can really do this thing, and who can you do it with? So yeah, live in the gray space, just live in it. I know it's easier said than done, but live in the gray space.
That's a very interesting sort of like mindset, but it is very true. So you're not so rigid, you're more fluid, and you're more open to what comes and how you shift. I really love that. And I think this is a great time to talk about the dreams, as you sort of mentioned them a little bit, on, how we even look at that. 'Cause that a lot of times we can try to categorize them, but they are really in this gray space also. They're changing us. They change based on your perception and your beliefs. And so there's like multiple layers to how you can look at a dream. It really can force people into these places. And I'm really curious, since you had said a lot of trauma and you had a lot of different types of losses, did you notice anything through your dreams? Did you ever have like the image of them appear, or was it other things that come to mind?
Yeah. I sort of do this fully and briefly in a way, because, that's my skill set, as you can see. to go back to what you were saying earlier of present day grief, I will say that my biggest challenge is currently what I'm going through when I'm not awake. I've always been a very vivid dreamer and a hyperactive thinker. And for a normal night for me is sort of like watching 7 Netflix shows in your head that you're narrating, and then also sort of carrying your to-do list and like every sort of like dream, hope, and want without like yourself there. Like it's sort of like a Black Mirror thing for me. I'd say 3 nights of the week. So for anybody who has that, I really feel for that. And there is such an urge to, I don't know, medicate, or, you know, you're just trying because you just want to sleep. I am not one of these people who sort of never really dream and then have like one formative dream. It's like sort of constant, to a point that, especially in the grief processes where I felt like I was more malleable, it would actually confuse me. They felt like memories. I mean, I dream very realistically, but within the 3 grief processes, I like journaled a bit about this today in preparation for this. And it's interesting because I noticed that my brother, I had very vivid dreams where we would have like the best time ever, always, like just like it was so loving. And then there was always a point in the dream where I realized, and I was like, oh, you have to go. And I would wake up bawling, like, because it was like every night losing him again. Like it was, but I wanted to spend the time with him so badly. But there was always this point in the dream where I was like, oh no, you've got to go. Oh no, you know, so it was like every time I dreamt about him, I was like, basically my brain was breaking my own heart again, kind of thing. And so that was really interesting how that's what it was with him. And then I had this sort of odd formative experience one day where I just really felt a shift in energy. And I'm not overly woo-woo, but like something sort of, I just knew that it was different. And since then, I don't dream as often, but when I do, it is very similar. And I don't want this to sound wrong, but when my brother shows up in my dreams now, it's usually in correlation with like a romantic interest. Like it's like sort of like there's elements of him in who I'll get to love next. Like I'm very like aware that he's sort of there. So that's kind of been that. My dad, my dreams of my dad are always, we're somewhere. And it's like, think of you were in like in a museum gallery. And I'm like, he's in the corner. And the whole dream is me trying to get to the corner. And I can't get there. And eventually I started to get there at times. And he can't speak. He just like nothing. So it's just this. And then there's a little bit of sometimes like, oh, it was all staged. Like he's living in, you know, Morocco. And like, I knew he was somewhere kind of thing. And there's more personal elements of sort of him. He's with people that I felt maybe he didn't protect me from at times, and that he's chosen sort of. And so like, I can never like really get to him. And that was really tormenting because I had these beautiful things with my brother where at least it still felt like I got to spend time with him. But with my dad, it was like it was hurting. It was breaking my heart in a different way every time. Like I'm trying to get to him all night. And every time I get to him, he either can't speak or he sort of ignores me. Like, you know, he's like not speaking to me. And I ended up actually doing fully legal assisted, medically induced ketamine therapy around it. And I finally, on one of my last sessions, had this whole sort of, I don't know what you call those, because it does to me felt very much like my dreams, the state that I would go into. And I've been wanting to kind of have some sort of contact with my dad. And my dad came to me in this, and he wouldn't speak at first. And when you're doing the ketamine sessions, you have like all your senses blocked, like, so you can't see, but you've got headphones on, you're listening to music. But my psychiatrist was there, you know, so he's checking in, but I always think he could see what I could see, like, but he couldn't, he's just sitting there. Right. So, and I can't remember a lot. So I will say things out loud that he'll then write down for me. And then we'd like go through or whatever. So my dad showed up in this, and I kind of said, you know, he was kind of like off, like just out of reach as usual. And I was just saying to him, like, can you just come over here? Can you just come over here? And it was this really weird thing where my dad basically told me that, and it flashed the scene from Mrs. Doubtfire when they're telling him he can't see his kids without visitation. And my dad and I always watched Mrs. Doubtfire together, my dad and my brother and my sister and I. And that scene where he says, my kids are like air, you can't take my kids away from me. Like I don't need somebody to watch me with my kids. And so I was seeing that scene, and basically my dad was saying to me that every time I try to get close to you, it's like you need medical supervision. This idea of me is not me. It's the suicide. It's the trauma. It's the every time I show up, it's like people need to be like with me, with my kid. A therapist is consulted. A coach is told. You tell your mother, like, because I've been frightening you for 10 years kind of in these ways that have come up. So he's saying all that. And I was seeing the Mrs. Doubtfire stuff, and the psychiatrist said, what's going on? What's going on? And I just looked my dad in the eyes and I said, nothing, just really pretty colors. Just really pretty colors. And it just like my dad nodded at me, and it was just like, I don't need help. You can be here. Like, you're not a danger to me. Like, I love you. Like, so it's this very formative, like, experience that I like. And I have to say that in the days and weeks and months since then, like the soul weight that finally dispersed, like of just like, but I didn't get it. I didn't get why there was this like sort of disconnect there, and I'd have to, in my waking hours, be like, he loved you more than anything. Like no one was more proud. He'd bring people in off the street to show them like my modeling pictures. Like he'd find strangers and bring them into the house. Like, you know what I mean? Like he'd call me every day. He learned how to text 6 months before he passed. So it was like T9 wording every 5 seconds. Like, you are a star. I love you, my son. I'm proud of you. It would just like never like, okay, I'm still at work. Like, like it would just be like this and that. So it's like logically, I'm like, there's no question, but it was these dreams made me really feel like I had done something wrong, or I hadn't gone there sooner, or, like whatever it was I had led to, whatever. And so that experience, which I do, the only thing I have words for is like, it was a dream because of the way that I was sort of induced. And for me, I dream that way anyways, where I can usually think during it anyway. So talking to the doctor at the same time didn't really not feel like a dream for me. Yeah. And then my friend, very weird, one dream ever. I was driven in like a beautiful, she had this Instagram account she was building called The Bougie Peasant. She was fun and loved fashion and, but like accepting the peasantness, but bougie. And she wasn't a peasant at all. She was, glamorous. But I was driven in this like very nice car. And I remember just like being like, who dressed me? Like I was clearly like a stylist had like this like perfectly like white cashmere coat that I could never wear because there would be coffee on it and like all this, being driven in this. And we just drove up to this house, and it was this beautiful white house with this beautiful white garden. And the person, I didn't see their face, but they opened the door for me, and I got up and she was in the garden, and she turned to me, and I just walked up to her and I looked her in the eyes, and she like embraced me. And it's like that weird thing where it feels like it was forever, but it was probably like 10 seconds. And then I like woke up, but like that dream sort of exists within me forever. Like it's on a loop. Like it's this weird sort of spaciousness within me, and my grief of like, she was good, and then again, like, yeah, never again. So it's really weird. My brother has been recurring, which makes sense kind of, I guess, brothers. And then my dad was very specific. And obviously I think the trauma bled into the dreams in that, and then having that experience. And I rarely dream of him now. And then for someone who dreams, like I said, 7 dreams at a time all night long, to have only seen my friend once, and it will be 6 years in March. It's pretty wild that she like, and it just gives me a sense of that energy is very free. And she was like a dancer, and it was a beautiful dancer. Nobody quite moved the way she moved. Like she literally, the way she moved on earth was unlike anything else. And I just know that's sort of still happening and flowing in whatever works. We won't get into any sort of beliefs around what happens after we die, because that would be another 4 hours, and I don't think I would have an answer. But keep honoring whatever works for you while it works for you. But yeah, that's sort of what really came up. And so in order to be nomadic the last 2 years and kind of go and find on myself, my most current recurring dream, I would have this dream where my dog, who's like one of the loves of my life, and I got him right after that suicidal moment. So he really understood that he's an emotional support dog, and his name's Hank Moody Jr. And I named him after a quote from the show Californication, because he says, "Whatever happens, happened. What happens next is up to you." And so I took that quote and then sort of named him. And Hank, my dad's name was Henry, so it kind of like worked. But he's not a dog. He's like a literal like love thing that just like exists to love anybody and everybody. And so he's the best dog ever to babysit, because he just has no problem acting like you have given him everything and you're his owner. But at certain points in this traveling, I've had to leave him behind. And my mom lives up by a lake, and there's a wolf that sits like outside her house. She comes home and it's there, and it really frightens me. And I'm always like, Mom, like, I don't know how to explain this to you, but I cannot lose my dog. So like, just like be so careful, you know? But it's weird. I would have this recurring dream where I'm sitting on this back porch, and it's like just beautiful. And I'm just like very aware in the dream that this is like my place, like my piece. And Hank's in the yard, and then a coyote comes, and it's like this thing where there's no way I can move fast enough to stop it. And there's no way I can slow things down to enjoy what time I have left. And it's just like this freeze. And it was just like this thing that would come up. And it started to happen like when I first started getting like my silver hairs. I started to notice like just like my own aging process. I started to have these dreams, and it was sort of this mixture of, I think, worrying, but then like this feeling of like when I was in those suicidal moments, like there's a coyote in the yard, and there's no way you can be fast enough. You cannot beat this. You cannot fix this, that like this nature, you know? And so this thing that really tormented me, and I actually brought it up when I was at a retreat down at Modern Elder Academy. Aaron Taylor, the football player, was helping run the whole week. And I had brought up in a circle share this dream, and we were talking about aging, and I was the youngest there by far, but he brought it up, and I got very emotional about this dream and how much it scares me. Like I don't really want to be in that yard. And I think it's about how I've been through so much and sort of invested my childhood in this grief survival, you know. And then now I feel like I'm saying normal, like a baby again, but like also like silver hair is showing up. So it's this very weird, like what is happening kind of thing. So we did the whole week. And at my graduation at the week, he pulled out this thing about symbolism. And the whole week I'd been talking about all I want to bring back into my life after writing the book, and feeling like I've done sort of enough for, you know, on a daily basis in my advocacy of helping others, was I just wanted to bring humor back into my life. That was always our thing. That was our gift. And apparently the spiritual significance of the coyote is a reminder to bring humor, like laughing coyote, back into your life. And so he just like really reframed the whole thing in this very beautiful sort of moment, in this like ceremony of, the thing you've been fearing most is actually an invitation, and it's the exact one that you've been asking for. So it's there's a coyote in the yard. It was a working memoir title for a minute for me, but it, you know, starting with that scene and then ending with that totally different flip on it. And I think it's very true for grief. And I think, you know, we can look at dreams and we can look at every little thing. And like I said, like obsess about it because we want to create meaning, because meaning feels like new closeness to somebody we've lost maybe. But there's that carefulness, that curiosity, that gentleness that has to exist, because totally missing the point. These things can coexist, love and humor in the yard. And the dream never goes to an attack. There's no lunge, there's no growling, there's no, you know, but that's where I went from my fear and what I've been through in my grief Olympics. Oh, here we go. And it's time for Coyote and Hank Moody Jr. to live in the yard. And I really try to remind myself that. And I still have the dream now. And it's just this weird, peaceful, like, you know, it kind of sounds like a Brad Pitt movie, just on like the back porch, and it's like calm, and like you got like the two things. He's just chilling, just Brad smoking a cigarette, not worried. But yeah, so that's where my dream stuff.
How beautiful. And pulls in on the idea that, and it's so funny that you're bringing this up because it's something I'm working through now, and timing is everything, but just that element of like bringing in joy and laughter. And sometimes those things, after we've been through lots of traumatic stuff and grief, joy and laughter can be just terrifying because we've been in that space for so long. And this is something that's, a recent conversation between me and Josh as well. Like, how do you embrace the fullness, like the whole human experience? And yes, you've been in survival mode, you or me or him or whoever, right? But like, how can we make space to be happy, have happiness and joy and bring lightness to a moment?
Yeah.
And that could be terrifying. That's hard. That's hard when you've been living in a
space. For me,
it
was harder that other people were uncomfortable by it, because I think humor is my number one tool in my resilience toolkit. And in my family, it's our language. We're fluent in knowing something so truly that like it can be so funny no matter what it is. And I'm like telling you about like my sister and our brains, but like I just laugh hysterically, and we're talking about the worst days of our lives. But we just, when you know something so well, I mean, the best comedians, the best comedic writers, they're so smart. Because when you know 100%. Something so intimately, it is funny in a totally different way. You're not going for the punchline. It's like, no, this is like life funny. This is the true find the funny kind of thing. And it's in there. And that's, I mean, I've embarked on, it actually launches on Monday, my podcast, Grief Club, the podcast, which Josh is on, and we talk about grief dreams. But when I sat down with myself at the beginning of the year and I was like, hey, there's a lot of opportunities coming up around this book and being sort of this younger grief guy and doing speaking and stuff. And I was like, but I'm not having fun. And it was the whole coyote thing. And it's not funny. And I'm funny. And I didn't do all this for 10 years to not have fun. Like, it just sounds so silly, like a career meeting where I'm going, oh, it's not fun, I'm not doing it. And people are like, I don't think that's how adulting works. And I'm like, well, it is for me. Like, so
I love it.
Literally in the structure of the episode, no matter what we talk about, I say it's equal parts honor the journey and find the funny. And I always end the episode with the find the funny. And I'm just talking about what part humor plays in their lives and really to just normalize that conversation. It's really interesting how I had a doctor on, actually another Canadian, and he's he studies death. And what he was saying is like, people seem to think that that's so sort of dark, right? But he's like, but really what it is that we study all of life and we've just left the death in. And when he said that to me, I just loved that so much, because you hear it and you think like, oh, this like the study of death, but the study of death is all of life, and death is like sort of the process within it. And that's how I feel about all of our emotions and humor. And like, I just chose to leave the humor in, and it really, really works for me. So this invisible rule that, there's guilt around laughter or how much we cry or don't cry or whatever. I just leave it all in. And as it comes up, it comes up. Trust me, if you laugh, it is not going to get you out of like crying or fix anything. Like, you're still going to be crying, So it's that comfortability with sitting with yourself and going, no, dude, this is truly funny. And that doesn't take away from anything else in your grief process. It doesn't dilute anything. In fact, it makes you so in tune with what's what, This
absolutely. And I think, when I tell people, oh yeah, I host a grief podcast, and they're like, oh, that's so dark and depressing. As I love talking about death and dying. And I'm like, actually, it's not. The people are beautiful and strong and charismatic and funny. It really is the pinnacle of all things human. And it's beautiful and it's so inspiring. I never feel bad about it. I always feel, I cry a lot, that's a given, but like, it makes me live more brightly, I think, and helps me. It feeds me. I mean, we wouldn't be like still doing it if that wasn't true. But I think just a misconception around death and dying. Is it difficult? Absolutely. But that journey, experiencing that, watching that, going through that, it pulls just these really brilliant parts of us out to the surface. I think it's beautiful. So yeah.
Me too. And thank you too for being friends who get it. When I subtitled the book that, it was like not me saying, I get what you're going through, but it's just that I get that this will always be there. And I really find the friends who get it conversations like this where you're talking about something so, serious, and I do leave today like feeling lighter, and that's how I know I spent a little bit of time with friends who who get it, and I think there's a lot of beauty to that. And I think that grief has always been like this isolating and inherently lonely process. And there's parts of it that are always going to be, because each grief process is specific to a bond in a relationship. We know that. But then there's this other part of where, like I said, you leave life in. So it's like the inverse of what he said. But if we leave life in, we can talk about anything for an hour and a half, because we're honoring the grief. It's there. It's not being hidden or pushed away, or, it's there. And when you're in the presence of other people who just get that. People always say, oh, I know somebody else who, dad's passed away in a similar way and like lost a sibling. And okay, that's very rare, but they have both. But, where they say, I think you guys should talk. And it's so funny because I'm always like, these people always think we get together and we just talk about like trauma for like an hour and a half. But it's like the quickest way to like laughter. And like, we talk about everything else because it's like, I know you get it. I don't have to there's no part of me that needs to show up to show that I really loved my people or it really affected me, or, we don't need to do any of that. I'm with a friend who gets it. So we can just be so silly and we're safe. It's like, I love that. So if you feel like you don't have those people in your life, that's why I love the podcasting and the idea of, for what I wanted to do was just hang out. So people, if they're not finding that, can feel that. And, some people be like, I can't believe that he laughs so much on that show. But it's like, yeah, you're going to be in for a surprise. Like I'm literally a child in church looking for every opportunity to find something to be truthful enough to get to laugh around it. Because that is my favorite thing about being alive. Gosh, I love that. And thank you guys so much for this conversation. Honestly, it's left me feeling lighter, which I did not honestly think an hour ago that it would. As I said in the beginning, I was in a very raw, vulnerable sort of place, and I'm leaving feeling like so much lighter and so much more connected.
I'm happy to hear that we didn't make you feel worse.
Yeah, that would suck. Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to cancel my birthday party because this was hard.
But I think there is truth to just talking about it in a space where you don't have to sort of explain, but just be. And I remember being on your podcast and you asked similar questions. I had a similar moment at the end where it's just like, you feel lighter, you feel freer. It's the person who you're speaking with and the moments they allow you to sit in. And I think that's such an important aspect. It's not just sharing, it's about what the environment is in your sharing and what you're allowed to almost be. And if you can laugh while you're free, that's it. And if you can cry at the same time while you're doing really great, because you're balancing everything. And so one of our last questions that we always love to ask is, if you could have a dream tonight of someone who has died, what would that look like to you? Since I know you're going to be going to bed pretty soon.
Oh, come on, guys. It was so good. We were laughing. You got to throw this. No, if I could have a dream, somebody tonight. It has to be somebody who died. Because if I'm being really honest, my gut response to that is that I wouldn't dream tonight, that I would rest, knowing that I don't need to subconsciously check in or sort of maintain my grief relationships all night long, as I have in the past, I think. But I don't know, what would be kind of fun? I mean, Elvis could show up. We could do I've always wanted to see, if I could go back in time, Elvis, Whitney Houston, or Queen at Live Aid. So I could have a dream that I got to be there. They're dead. I took your question and I flipped it. Sorry. I'm out of sentimental juice for my own loved ones today.
No, but
my brother. I want to see Freddie Mercury.
I love it. No, it's good. We've never had a response like that, actually. Usually it's
like something cool.
The awareness around, I'm out of sentimental juice. I want to see Whitney Houston or Queen. And hey, that's the lightness of it. And that would be what you need right now. So we accept it with open arms.
Thank you.
I will say we did have someone on the podcast who frequently dreams of Prince, because such a big part of someone's life. So celebrities are still, and people that move us in different ways. Yes. That's part of all of our grief. It may not be as something we focus on, like the ones we have previously, but they are a part of our life, and their death meant something, and who they are and what they do on stage and help us feel alive. I love it. That's great. I really do hope you get to dream of all of them. And who knows, maybe they bring you on stage and you can do something with them, right?
There you go. And I no longer want to have that dream now. Do not pull me on stage. Oh, thank you guys. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just want to say I appreciate your time and effort today. And I'm just really, I love this episode. I love the conversation. I know the listeners are going to love it. And just so happy you showed up in full force today and just grace us with all your wisdom and insights and vulnerability and humor and your, just beautiful storytelling and just so cool. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it so much. And thanks for hanging out in a way that makes us all feel like we're in this together. I think that's the coolest thing, for people to listen to you guys.
Yeah, we love it. So listeners, where can they find you?
I am Addison Brasil, Brazil like the country, but spelt with an S, as my dad always said, on socials personally. And then I have at Share My Grief Club, SHARE, My Grief Club, as much as my mom would like that to be share, as in the share. It's Share My Grief Club, mygriefclub.com. And launching on Monday, I'm sure by the time this airs, it will exist, but Grief Club, the podcast, will be available on all the streamers, and I'll just be hanging with friends who get it and using each of the experience in my book as sort of a loose launching point to explore. And I really feel at home in being sort of this everyday guy who curates what I don't consciously create, and just for Grief Club going in and kind of pulling in my people who said they'd be there for me if I got through. Well, now I'm strong arming them in and putting them on record and saying, we got to help the others. I made a promise. So I'd love to see everybody there. Yeah.
Great. Love that. And happy birthday. Wishing you all everything your heart desires, a lovely year and grace and just a blessing. And like you said, 90% gratitude that you get another year of existence and experiences and fullness of life. So happy birthday to you.
Thank you.